For centuries, the Vatican remained a bastion of stability and tradition. Even as the world changed around it, the chair of Peter stood firm, grounded in centuries of doctrine, rites, and spiritual authority. But in recent weeks, something new began stirring within the halls of the Roman Curia. Something was coming, something few expected, and that something had a name. Pope Leo XIV. Leo XIV's pontificate was already marked by bold gestures, courageous speeches, and a disarming humility. But what happened recently went beyond all expectations. The words and decisions issued from the Holy See did not merely spark theological debates. They sent tremors through the very heart of the Vatican. What many considered unshakable was now being boldly re-examined by the successor of Peter. But what exactly had he decided? What could possibly lead seasoned prelates to exchange uneasy glances during consistories? Why did even ordinary faithful scattered across the globe feel called to fast and pray? The truth is, the Pope had entered a silent retreat for 7 days, with no public statements. When he returned, he spoke with words that thundered across the rooftops of Rome. The Church needs purification, and it begins within these sacred walls. Indeed, this was no mere pious exhortation, it was a summons. In that first message, delivered in the Pauline chapel before a small audience, but broadcast to the entire world, the Pope said, "Silent infidelity and comfort with error have dried up many sources of grace. It is time to water the roots of faith with tears and conversion." The impact was immediate. Archbishops convened emergency meetings, theological faculties began drafting responses, fervent lay Catholics launched prayer vigils. And while the press speculated about resignations, rebellions, or reforms, the Pope remained silent, serene, and firm. Tradition tells us that before great shifts, God allows a time of silence and confusion. So it was before the Council of Trent. So it was before the election of St. Pius X. And so it seems to be now with Leo XIV. In this opening chapter, the seeds of questioning and calling are planted. What did Leo XIV see? What does he long to heal? And more importantly, are we ready to obey, even when we do not understand? The morning after his return from retreat, Pope Leo XIV did something no one expected. Instead of summoning the College of Cardinals, instead of releasing a formal apostolic exhortation, he sent a handwritten letter, not to diplomats, bishops, or theologians, but to every religious community in the world. The letter began with a verse from Revelation. "You have the reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Wake up." Rev. 3:1-2. Written in simple language with pen and paper, the Pope addressed monks, nuns, friars, cloistered sisters, missionaries, and novices. In 3 pages, he called the Church back to its first love. You are not professionals of structure. You are lovers of the cross. You are not managers. You are witnesses. Return to prayer. Return to silence. Return to sacrifice. The world watched in stunned silence. For decades, the Church had spoken of modernization, synodality, dialogue, but now the Pope was calling for something ancient, something radical. Some superiors were moved to tears, others were confused, a few resisted, but no one remained indifferent. In many convents, adoration chapels were opened for perpetual prayer. In some monasteries, fasting was renewed. Others reported conversions among young religious who had grown lukewarm. A cardinal close to the pontiff confided anonymously, "This letter is not a nostalgia trip, it's a rescue operation." In one passage, Leo XIV even added a handwritten note in the margins, "If we are no longer willing to bleed for Christ, then we are merely actors on a sacred stage." Rome had not seen such clarity in decades. One Dominican novice in Bologna posted on social media, "Today I cried for the first time since entering the order, not because I am sad, but because I feel I was just truly called." Was this the beginning of a reform, or a rupture? Some feared division, others sensed revival. But above all, a question echoed through the cloisters of the world. If the Pope himself is kneeling, why are we still standing? Following the global wave triggered by Pope Leo XIV's handwritten letter, the College of Cardinals called an emergency consistory behind closed doors. It was not publicly announced. No journalists were allowed. The few details that emerged came from whispers within the Vatican walls. Inside the Apostolic Palace, over 120 cardinals gathered, faces tense, hearts divided. The tone was not ceremonial, it was urgent. One source described the atmosphere as a spiritual tribunal cloaked in crimson. "The Holy Father is exceeding his role," one cardinal reportedly said. "Or perhaps he is finally fulfilling it," whispered another. What was at stake? Some claimed Leo XIV was bypassing procedures. Others feared he was opening the door to dangerous interpretations of tradition. But beneath all arguments was one burning tension. Leo XIV had not consulted them. In the past, papal reform was often shaped with diplomatic finesse, commissions, debates, drafts. Leo XIV had chosen another path, direct intervention, and that made many nervous. During the meeting, the prefect of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith raised concerns. If this movement grows among the young and zealous, what happens to the theological balance we've preserved since Vatican II? But another bishop stood up and said, "And if the balance we've kept was not holiness, but lukewarmness?" Silence fell. Even in disagreement, the weight of that question hung heavy. Outside the Vatican, the world knew nothing of what had transpired. But inside, something cracked, not in the walls of marble, but in the certainties many held dear. Some cardinals returned to their residences disturbed. Others knelt that night for the first time in years. The Pope had not spoken again since the letter. He remained in his chambers, praying. That night one elderly Jesuit was heard muttering in the Vatican gardens, "He's not dismantling the church, he's purifying it, and fire always comes before the gold shines." Meanwhile, in the Roman streets, lay people began gathering to pray the rosary for the Pope. A quiet revival was spreading, not coordinated, not explained, only lived. Was this a rupture, a renaissance, or the beginning of something no council could predict? While theologians debated and cardinals argued, an unexpected scene unfolded that would become a turning point, not in a council hall, but in the square of a poor Brazilian village. It was a humid afternoon in a town near Pernambuco, when a little girl, no older than 9, walked barefoot into a chapel dedicated to Our Lady of Sorrows. She was thin, her dress torn, her hands clasping a small wooden rosary. Locals say she had prayed the rosary daily for the Pope without knowing exactly who he was. That very day, across the ocean, Pope Leo XIV was sitting in solitude at the Domus Sanctae Marthae. A nun handed him a sealed envelope, a letter from a missionary in Brazil. Inside it was a photo. The girl, kneeling on stone, eyes closed, hands joined. The Pope stared at the image for minutes. Then, unexpectedly, he wept. A single tear rolled down his cheek, landing on the photograph. Those present said they had never seen him cry, not even during moments of loss or war. Something about that little girl's posture pierced his soul. "She carries in her silence more theology than all our treatises," the Pope whispered. He then stood, walked to the chapel of the Annunciation, and prayed aloud the words of the Magnificat. "He has cast down the mighty from their thrones and lifted up the lowly." Luke 1:52. That moment marked the beginning of what would later be called the Marian Days, a series of public actions where Pope Leo XIV placed the most ignored, poor, and hidden people at the heart of his teachings. He began speaking not from balconies, but from hospitals. He celebrated Mass in prisons. He visited a shelter for abandoned children, and there he repeated what he saw in the little girl's eyes. "She prays more purely than we preach, and I must follow her example." The news spread. Suddenly, millions around the world began fasting for the forgotten. Bishops in Africa opened diocesan funds for the poor. In Asia, religious sisters began novenas for humility. And in Pernambuco, that little girl, now named by the Vatican only as Clara, became a symbol not of fame, but of divine interruption. While many looked to Rome for answers, God had chosen to shake the church through a barefoot child who simply believed. It was a quiet Thursday morning when Vatican security received an unexpected instruction. Clear the cameras, lock the outer gates, no press, no announcements. The command came directly from Pope Leo XIV. The place, St. Peter's Basilica. The reason? A mass like no other. Only a handful of witnesses were allowed: janitors, kitchen staff, nuns from the pharmacy, and street sweepers from nearby. The grand columns echoed with silence. No choirs, no vestments of gold. The Pope entered wearing only a simple white cassock and a plain wooden cross. At the foot of the altar, he knelt for nearly 15 minutes. Then he rose, turned to the few present, and whispered, "This is not a performance. This is the Last Supper. Let us begin." It was the most unadorned Mass celebrated in the Vatican in over a century. No Latin chant, no orchestra, no political presence, just bread, wine, and a trembling prayer. "Lord, do not pass by your church without awakening her." During the consecration, a priest assisting him noted the Pope's hands shaking, not from age, but from a palpable fear of God. Those present testified that the air changed. Some wept. One janitor later told a journalist anonymously, "It was the first time I believed I had truly seen the body of Christ." And then the Pope did something that stunned even the most devout. He refused to receive communion first. Instead, he knelt again, lifted his eyes, and said, "The first shall be last. Let the forgotten come forward." And so, a cleaning woman with wrinkled hands stepped up. A young African seminarian followed. One by one, the hidden faces of the church received the Eucharist first. Only afterward did the Pope rise and receive it himself, in silence. No statement was issued, no decree followed. But by evening, word had spread. Across the globe, parishes began organizing silent masses. Monasteries reintroduced kneeling communions. And among the people, a hunger awoke, not for spectacle, but for reverence. Theologians debated the gesture's meaning. Liturgists critiqued or praised it. But to the poor it was clear, the Pope has stepped down from the throne and walked with us toward the Lamb. In a time of noise, he had chosen silence. In a time of power, he had chosen humility. And the world was watching. Whispers began to circulate through Rome. The Pope was missing. For 2 full days, he was not seen at any public event, not even at morning prayers or the Angelus. No papal tweets, no photos, no lights in his apartments. Then, on the 3rd night, a photograph leaked. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Pope Leo XIV, dressed in simple black, entering the catacombs of Domitilla, one of the earliest burial sites of the Christian martyrs. He was not alone. Accompanying him were 12 individuals: lay people, a couple of priests, 2 women religious, and a disabled man in a wheelchair. The Vatican confirmed later, this was the gathering of the witnesses. No microphones, no notes. Just prayer, silence, and tears in the tunnels where ancient saints were buried. One participant under anonymity shared, "The Pope looked at the carved names of martyrs and said, they did not have meetings, they did not publish synods, they bled." He then asked each person present, "Are you willing to suffer for Christ without applause? Are you ready to be holy without being noticed?" Each one gave a quiet yes. For over 6 hours they prayed beneath the earth. Psalms were whispered. The litany of the saints echoed off stone. The Pope read aloud from the book of Hebrews. They wandered in deserts and mountains, and in caves and holes in the ground. The world was not worthy of them. Hebrews 11:38. The next day, Vatican security found the Pope back in his quarters, praying his breviary before sunrise. No explanation was given, no video published, but something shifted. Those who had grown skeptical of his decisions now saw a man not leading a rebellion, but returning to the roots. Not revolution, but remembrance. One French bishop was heard saying, "He is reminding us that the church was not born in palaces, but in tombs." Soon after, pilgrims began visiting the catacombs in droves, not for photos, but for silence. Seminaries reported a rise in vocations. Young people began forming underground prayer groups, naming themselves after martyrs. Some in the Curia rolled their eyes, others fell to their knees, for in the echo of those ancient graves, the voice of the early church was awakening again. And Leo XIV had gone down into the earth, not to hide, but to listen. After days of silence and private encounters, Pope Leo XIV emerged once again, not to speak, but to write. A new apostolic letter titled Deus Videt, God Sees, was released to the world. But unlike previous encyclicals addressed to bishops or clergy, this one was sent directly to the heads of state of the world's wealthiest nations. The tone, neither political nor poetic, it was piercing, a father speaking truth to power. God sees the hidden contracts. God sees the food wasted while his children starve. God sees the machines of death funded by taxes from pews. God sees your laws that ignore the unborn, the refugee, the elderly. It caused an earthquake in the media. Some denounced it as meddling. Others hailed it as prophetic. But it was clear Leo XIV had crossed a threshold no recent pope had dared. The letter included 3 direct calls: debt forgiveness for impoverished nations, immediate humanitarian corridors for Christian minorities in persecution, a 10-year moratorium on weapon exports to active conflict zones, no threats, no condemnations, only this haunting close: one day the thrones of men will vanish, but the cries of the poor will remain in the memory of heaven. In Washington, the letter was read in the National Cathedral. In Berlin, it was quoted in Parliament. In Tokyo, bishops called for national repentance. And in Africa, priests wept aloud at Mass. But it was the youth who responded first. Thousands organized peace walks in Rome, São Paulo, and Kinshasa. Catholic students began hunger strikes. Some CEOs resigned publicly, citing a need for moral reparation. Meanwhile, within the Vatican, the letter sparked tension. Several diplomats warned that such moves risked the Church's neutrality. One senior official muttered, "He's not just speaking like a prophet, he's acting like one." That has never ended well. But the Pope's response came through his silence, and through a small note left on the altar of his private chapel. The Lord said, "I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I must answer him." Sit. Matthew 25:42. This was no longer about papal popularity. It was about judgment, and Leo XIV had chosen the side of the voiceless, even if the powerful turned away. The Church, once cautious, now stood at a crossroads, and the world was holding its breath. It was well past midnight when the Swiss Guard noticed movement in the Vatican gardens. Cameras had been deactivated. The lights near the Apostolic Palace were dim, but a small group was gathering near the statue of St. Joseph, unnoticed, unannounced. At the center stood Pope Leo XIV. He held no staff, wore no mitre, only a worn-out brown cloak and a crucifix around his neck. Those present were a handful of beggars from Rome, 2 refugees from Syria, a blind woman, and an elderly couple who had recently lost their home to floods. There were no journalists, no microphones, just silence. And then the Pope lifted his right hand and whispered a blessing. "May God, who hears the groan of the earth and the cry of the poor, bless you. May you be seen, held, and vindicated. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." One of the homeless men fell to his knees. The blind woman wept. The refugees embraced the Pope as a brother. It was later revealed that this moment had been inspired by a dream the Pope had, of Christ standing in the dark, not in a basilica, but among the outcasts, offering peace to those who had lost all hope. The next morning, he gave no homily about it, no letter, but a simple message was posted on the Vatican website at dawn. "Last night the Lord came not in thunder but in bare feet, and the Church must walk barefoot again." The symbolic weight of that phrase shook many. It prompted dioceses around the world to hold midnight blessings in slums, shelters, and alleys. In Buenos Aires, a bishop carried the Blessed Sacrament into a bus station. In Seoul, a cardinal spent the night serving food to the homeless. In Rome, young seminarians gave away their shoes and walked the city barefoot, reciting the Psalms. The Pope had ignited not a policy, but a movement. Inside the Vatican, not everyone was pleased. One cardinal warned, "He is mystifying the people. This is not governance. It's a pilgrimage without a map." But others saw clearly Leo XIV wasn't lost. He was leading the church where Christ had walked, into the night, into suffering, into mystery, and there, without trumpet or spotlight, a new kind of holiness was quietly being born, not through command, not through spectacle, but through presence. One morning, well before sunrise, a Vatican housekeeper entered the private study of Pope Leo XIV to clean. What she found stopped her in her tracks. The desk was covered in open books, Bibles, letters from prisoners, photos of sick children from a mission hospital in Sudan, handwritten notes from farmers in El Salvador. But what drew her attention were the pages of the Pope's own journal, soaked with tears. He had fallen asleep at the desk, arms folded over his writings, a rosary clutched in one hand. The housekeeper quietly stepped away, but the moment could not be forgotten. That very week, the Pope publicly suspended all his scheduled audiences and issued an invitation instead. "Come to the gardens. Bring no cameras, no applause. Only your wounds, and I will bring mine." Over 300 people came, not dignitaries, but those who rarely enter palaces, widows, single mothers, wounded soldiers, ex-addicts, men just released from prison. The Pope sat among them on the grass. He didn't preach. He listened. A former prostitute wept on his shoulder. A teenage boy with Down syndrome made the Pope laugh. A woman with terminal cancer gave him her scarf. In return, he gave her his ring. When asked later why he removed the fisherman's ring, he replied, "Because today I was the one being fished from the deep." That moment was recorded in silence, but its echo reached far. In parishes around the world, confessions multiplied. Lay people returned to adoration. Priests began speaking less of administration and more of broken hearts. And still, controversy grew in Rome. Some feared he was humanizing the papacy too much, making it vulnerable. One conservative commentator said, "A pope who cries is a church that bleeds, that may comfort the poor, but it unsettles the powerful." Yet others saw in those tears not weakness, but sacredness. An Italian journalist wrote, "When he weeps, he reminds us that Peter did too, after denying the Lord." As news spread of the Pope's vulnerable moments, something unprecedented occurred. Spontaneous candlelight vigils began forming outside prisons, nursing homes, orphanages, all lit by Catholics who simply whispered, "He hasn't forgotten them, so neither will we." It became clear Leo XIV was not seeking admiration. He was pouring himself out. One priest summarized it best. "He is writing an encyclical, not on paper, but in tears." No one expected what would follow. 3 days after the tearful encounter in the Vatican gardens, Pope Leo XIV disappeared from public view again. No messages, no Angelus, no mention in Vatican bulletins. The bells of St. Peter's rang every morning, but no pope appeared at the window. Finally, on the 7th day, the Vatican released a brief statement. "The Holy Father has entered a retreat of silence and penance. We ask for prayers." Inside the Apostolic Palace, the Pope had secluded himself in the chapel. Only his confessor and physician were permitted entry. For days he fasted. He spoke no words. He slept on the ground. A candle was kept lit at all hours before the Blessed Sacrament. A single page was later found on the altar, written in his hand, "Lord, I have spoken enough. Now I must decrease. Speak through my absence what my voice cannot bear to declare." Outside, the church trembled. Rumors began to swirl. Would he abdicate? Was he ill? Had he received a vision? Cardinals met in private, tensions rising. Some feared he was about to release a decree that would divide the church. Others sensed something holier, a preparation for sacrifice. On the 9th night, a homeless man from the outskirts of Rome approached the bronze doors of the Vatican, carrying a bundle. Guards stopped him, but a priest nearby intervened. The man explained, "I had nothing to give the Pope, so I brought what fed me in the hardest night." Inside the bundle, a simple loaf of bread, wrapped in newspaper. By the Pope's order, the bread was brought to his chapel. He broke it silently before the tabernacle, kissed it, and consumed it with tears. That same night, lightning struck near the dome of St. Peter's. When dawn came, Leo XIV emerged, not in procession, not in triumph, but barefoot, in silence, carrying only a crucifix. He walked the full length of St. Peter's Square, eyes fixed on the heavens as thousands began to gather behind him in stunned silence. Journalists tried to shout questions. He said nothing. When he reached the obelisk at the center, he knelt, pressed his forehead to the stones and whispered, "Domine non sum dignus." "Lord, I am not worthy." He then stood, blessed the people, and returned to the apostolic palace without a word. That day, all across the world, masses were offered. Confessions lines grew, bishops wept, and one simple phrase began appearing on Catholic doors, walls and hearts. He reminded us what it means to be church. Some say he is preparing the church for the greatest purification of our time. Others say he is preparing himself to die. But all agree, something has begun, and heaven is watching.